Okay, looks like we're live.
All right.
So let's go ahead and start her up. Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write better fiction. I'm Steve McLean, an aspiring writer. I write for fun.
Which is what an aspiring writer is, I suppose. I'm Aaron Gansky. I also write for fun and profit too,
Right.
which is I'm rolling in the dough right now.
So right now we're doing our first Google Hangout Live, where this should actually go up to YouTube. So hopefully I've done everything right and we don't have any kind of problems. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Aaron, our show topic today is being critical and whether or not you could be too critical about yourself. What is constructive and what is just tearing you down?
Right. Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, why don't you share with us what that means for you, what you think about it?
Well, for me, I'm a very critical person. I'm sure you have never noticed, Steve, but especially with my strong opinions on Twilight and things of that nature. So
Right, yeah.
I'm a very critical person, and I think a lot of that actually comes from the self-criticism that kind of goes on in the mind of every writer. And as you're writing, if you've written it all, you know what I'm talking about, and it's that feeling of not being good enough, the feeling that you can do better, and there's a fine line between those two things. And really, as a writer, one of the keys to success is knowing when to listen to that and when to ignore that and finding that line, that distinction there.
Yeah, as the story goes, I think it was C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien that were friends back in the day, and C.S. Lewis was urging J.R. Tolkien to finish his work, Lord of the Rings, but he just kept going back to it and kept making revisions and kept doing more because it just wasn't quite perfect, and he felt like actually not wasn't quite perfect, but he just felt like it wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough,
Mhm.
and saying that it's not quite perfect implies that he would assume that it's close to perfect. But instead, it was
Hmm.
more like a self-conscious thing. He didn't feel like it was good enough to publish it, and C.S. Lewis, at his urging, convinced him to go ahead and publish it,
Right.
and that's how we got what we have now.
Yeah.
That's the story that I've heard. I've never actually read this anywhere. Someone was relaying this to me at one point, and yeah, I think that I probably struggle quite a bit with it as well. The need to make sure that everything is properly thought out, and if it's not been properly thought out, it's really just not good enough. And so I just keep going back to trying to revise and trying to work on things. And I will say that I don't think that I am at a point where the book is close to being a good final product because there still are too many answered questions. But I do realize that there, to a certain extent, there really is something there for me to improve upon because I something may actually be well done enough that it's good, and I will still look at it and just see all the problems.
Yeah. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, um, in the sense that being self-critical can ultimately end with a better product. It's going to help you find the places that aren't strong. It's going to help you find ways to strengthen them. But it can also be damaging in the sense that if you are not, hmm, I guess if you're not real clear on what's okay and what isn't okay in context of how you speak to yourself, if that makes sense, then
Hmm.
you're going to end up doing things that are a little more self-destructive. So knowing the voice inside your head and knowing if it's being critical in order to make you better or if it's being critical in order to essentially to hinder you, that's a fine distinction to make, and it's kind of a tough one too. So there are a couple things that I do to distinguish between the critical voice, which is good, and more of the self-doubt kind of a thing, which is bad. And the first thing that I do is ask myself basically what is the end product? If the voice inside of my head is saying tear it up, throw it away, it's no good, it will never be any good, you're a terrible writer, just give up on life, that's pretty easy to know that that's the destructive voice.
Yeah, but it's not always that clearly defined, right?
Correct.
And that's the problem.
Yeah. Usually it's a lot more subtle. And I kind of like what Sylvia Plath says about it. She says, and by the way, everything in life is writable about if you have the outgoing guts to do it and the imagination to improvise. The worst enemy to creativity is self-doubt. And that's kind of the thing. If the self-doubt is getting in your way of creativity, then you know that it's more of a destructive force, and you're going to want to ignore that and kind of shut that out.
I know not just in writing, but in a lot of places in the world, and a lot of places, just when you're successful in the workplace, for instance, a lot of people feel this way, and I know I felt the same way. When are they going to realize that I don't actually know what I'm doing? It's the whole imposter syndrome, where
Hmm.
you just imagine that everyone's out there thinking, that they're just a step away from realizing that you have no clue, and that you're just kind of making things up as you go. And it's the same thing with writing, where you're going to write something, and then somebody's going to read it, and they're going to realize, oh my gosh, this guy, he doesn't know what he's writing about, or this girl, she doesn't know what she's writing about. She doesn't understand the material, and she obviously doesn't know how to properly develop this character, or he doesn't know how to write tension well, or whatever it is, just things that, and I'm sure that there are people out there that will go ahead and fill that role for you and be extra
Hmm.
super critical of everything that you do. For
Right.
instance, I know a guy, and he's extra super critical of all of these writers out there,
Hmm.
and he just goes off on how he doesn't like Twilight, and how he doesn't like, the um,
Under the Dome.
Under the Dome. Yeah,
He sounds like a real jerk.
yeah, it's a total jerk.
Yeah, I
But
wouldn't hang out with him at all. So, yeah, and but again, I think that criticism is comes from looking at my own work, and always pushing myself to try and do better. That voice that says, I guess that imposter syndrome that you're talking about keeps you from being productive. It keeps you from sending your stories out. It keeps you from sending your novels out. And if you really want to be published, if you really want to make a living as a writer, if you really want to kind of take that next step and become the professional, you can't do it unless you're sending stuff out, unless you're honestly seeking publication. And you want to make sure that the timing is right. And a lot of that comes back to this idea of knowing uh, what the voice is doing. Is the voice keeping you from sending something out because it's truly not ready, or is the voice keeping you from sending something out because you're afraid? Does that make sense?
right, yeah, yeah, and if you're gonna I- if you're going to allow yourself to believe all of that, something I'll interject also is that there may be some amount of laziness in there, where you think that it's not good enough, um, and so you just kind of give up. And it's like not getting back on the horse, or
Hmm.
not staying after it. You're lacking the persistence. If you allow yourself to listen to that kind of discouraging whatever it is,
Hmm.
you're giving in, and you're turning out to be more lazy than you probably ought to be. If you actually want to write and write well, you got to push through it and make sure that you're not making excuses for yourself. And
Yeah.
a lot of that is what it turns into is, hey, I'm an imposter, or I don't know what I'm doing here. I might as well just give up, or whatever. When really what it is you just don't have the persistence to stick with it and to write, and so you're looking for the critical areas that will excuse you.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's I mean, I think that sounds a lot like that kind of that self-doubt. And you want to make sure as you move forward that you can check yourself with another pair of eyes. You can have somebody else, and you can, a good reader that you trust, that you can send your work to and say, hey, can you take a quick look at this? What do you think? Is this ready to go, or what do I need to fix? And they'll let you know. They'll
Right.
let you know. And when you can corroborate what that voice inside your head is saying, then it's probably just more self-critical, and it's pushing you to be better. But if that voice is telling you not even to send it out to your beta readers, that can be problematic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's some psychology here going on.
Now, granted, when I send you my work or you send me yours, you will be pretty brutal. I will be, I think, exceedingly brutal, probably more brutal than
Hmm.
you are even, right?
Hmm.
And
And sometimes, yeah.
and now that kind of criticism, as long as it's constructive, is pretty productive, right?
Hmm.
How do you view
Right.
that? I mean, how do you deal with that? And how do you integrate that into what it is that you're working on without allowing it to discourage you?
Man, there's a certain element of self-confidence that is required to be a writer, and developing that thick skin is a skill I think that's necessary for successful writers to develop. And I think you kind of I don't know if there's any good way to go about learning that skill of having a thick skin other than simply putting your work out there and letting somebody tear it apart. I remember the first time I let my dad read one of my stories, and he gave it back with corrections. And you think I'm critical? I love my dad to death, but it looked like he like opened a vein on this thing and just bled all over it. There was so much red ink, and I was like, wow, this is I'm a failure, and I'm never going to amount to anything. But what was cool about it is that my dad came alongside me. He said, I'm being critical because I see a lot of positive things going on here.
Right. Yeah.
And within all that red ink, there was still some encouragement. And I think it's really important when you're looking for a reader that you're going to find somebody who's not only critical but also encouraging.
Well, I've heard it said that you want to open with a compliment and you want to close with a compliment, and
Hmm.
everything in between is softened because you do that.
Yeah.
Or you might want to take the approach of for every one bad thing that you have to say two good things. If
Hmm.
you're on out of good things to say, well, I guess you can't point out all the other bad things.
Yeah. Focus focus on the big picture. As a mentor, I do this a lot with my students, um, and getting their work, and a lot of times it's pretty rough. But I will, I can still see those shiny moments, and I remember again when my father, was going over some of my work early on when I was a kid, and I try and temper my criticism with some encouragement. And I'll try and start with something positive. I try and end with something positive. Um, and it's as a mentor, it's gotten a lot easier because it's easier for me to see the positive things and to identify the things that need work. And I would
Mhm.
say, in context of trying to find good readers, the key that you're looking for is specificity. And I would also say that that's one of the keys to distinguishing between the self-critical voice and the self-doubt voice is specificity. When that voice in the back of your head is saying the dialogue in this scene is not strong enough, it really needs to be drummed up. That's self-critical, and that means you need to fix your dialogue. If the voice in the back of your head is saying this scene sucks, it's awful,
Yeah.
the whole book is terrible, just give up.
Yeah, it's
That
almost like if
lack.
there's not a path forward with whatever you're telling yourself,
Right.
then obviously it's not the constructive kind, right?
Right. If your voice can say, or if that voice tells you to develop this particular aspect that's specific, if it can even tell you that this particular aspect is lacking, that's specific enough to move forward.
Right.
Even if it doesn't give you like a particular path forward, if it just simply says the dialogue is weak, this character isn't working, the scene falls flat emotionally, if it can correctly identify a fault or a flaw in your writing, that's something that you want to listen to and heed. And if you don't know the way forward, if your voice can't express that to you, then that's when you start getting some other, alpha readers involved. And I would suggest one, maybe two. You don't want to send this out to 6 or 7 people. You want to keep your. A lot of people have writing groups, which I think are great, but you have to do it right. And I would say a writing group of 8 to 10 people is just far too much. I keep I keep 2 alpha readers, of which you are one, and I
Yep.
have a healthy stable of beta readers, of which you're one, and uh, basically getting that community of voices is good, but only after I know within the small writing circle, myself, you, and Dennis Fulgoni, if we all say, yeah, this is good enough to move forward, then I move forward. If you have concerns, if Dennis has concerns, or if I have concerns, then I have to kind of go back to the text and say, okay, is this valid? Is this something I can fix? Is this a point where I need to kill my darlings? I can start asking myself those tough questions.
Yeah, so I mean, as you're going through somebody else's work, what's the approach that you generally take when you're criticizing them? What are some of the things that you like to point out, and what are some of the things that you like to say? And then in a second here, I have another point talking about being self-critical. Just remind me.
Okay. Nice. I would say when I'm looking at things, the first thing that I really look at is for a strong foundation. Um, I want to know that the characters are solid. I want to know that the plot is solid. I want to know that there is a path forward, as you were saying, that this is a journey that's going someplace, and that's really what I look at. That's the basic. That's the foundation on which to build. And once I have that, once I can see that, then I go ahead and I identify that and I say these are the things that you're doing well. If I don't get a sense for that, if that starts to fall apart, I can start looking at that and saying, okay, well, there's a crack in your foundation here that we need to fix. Now, I like it. It's a pretty foundation. Don't get me wrong. The characters are strong. This part of the character is really interesting. A lot of times, I'll actually pick up on aspects of character that the writers don't even realize, and I'll say, "Oh, is this a character quirk that you're developing? Is this something that they kind of do? Is this going to be normal for them?" And a lot of times it comes back and they'll say, "Well, no, I just kind of put that in there." And I thought this is something that has a lot of potential. You might want to develop that.
Yeah,
And so that's what I'm really looking for is as a mentor, I want to find what they're doing, what their strengths are, and encourage them to really develop those. And if they're weak in an area, I'm going to try and strengthen that. But each writer has their own unique voice. They have their own unique skill set. They have their own areas in which they excel. And not every writer is going to sound like me, which is probably good. Not every writer is going to sound like you. Not every writer is going to sound like Stephen King. There's a unique aspect to a voice in each writer, and I would try and hone in on that and say, here's where I think your voice is going, and I think you can develop it by doing these things. Here's some concerns I may have because your voice, while it's good here, is kind of lacking in this other area, and I'll be specific. That varies from project to project.
name the editor that it was. I think it was Carver's editor.
Gordon
That,
Lish.
yeah, and then you should share that story again.
Oh man, I'm not sure that's the greatest example. Lish
But
was
the worst example is sometimes the best way to convey the point, right?
yeah. Well, but I'll tell you what. For those of you who aren't familiar with the story, basically Raymond Carver is one of America's greatest short story writers. Well revered, incredible work that he's done. But a lot of his early work was heavily influenced by Gordon Lish, who was an editor. And Gordon Lish did a lot of work on Carver's pieces, so much so that there, at some points, he was rewriting the endings. At some point, he stopped taking things out and started putting stuff in. And so it became this like wonderful gray area of where does Carver end and where does Lish begin, and that was a kind of a debate that raged. But Gordon Lish, I think, was born without tact. That was not something that came in his genetics, and so he could be pretty pointed. And at first, Raymond Carver, as a beginning writer, was just very thankful. Hey, I'm just happy to be published. Awesome, thanks for all your hard work. And eventually, that relationship soured when Carver had his own reputation and disagreed with Lish on a few points, and Lish made some changes without Carver's consent.
Right.
And Carver was like, you know what, finding another editor, and so they kind of split ways, and both had success after that still, but it was a unique kind of a situation in that regard.
Right. Okay, so something else I'll talk about is when you are reviewing your own writing, don't always trust yourself because something that you think is weak or something that you think is bad in some way, unless you really have a good reason for thinking that, i.e., you're violating some major rule, and or you're violating some kind of you know, the direction of your story, or a character's, if you're going against the way that a character would normally react to something, there better be a good reason for it. Something like that is probably a good reason. That's pretty constructive. But you have to remember that, it's just like with editing your stuff. When you go through, you'll read the same sentence 100 different times, and it may be miswritten, but because you've read it, because you wrote it, because you know what it's supposed to say, you may not notice that, whereas somebody else who gets a hold of your book might. And so if you feel like you're just being extra critical, or you're suspicious of some of your writing, and you think that, that there could be room for improvement, but you don't have a really good reason,
Mm.
then put it in the hands of an editor and actually ask someone else, an editor, alpha reader, ask them for their input. And then again, if you have the same alpha readers time in and time out, and you're giving them a lot of material and you're giving it to them quite frequently, also keep in mind the fact that you may run into a situation where those alpha readers have attuned to your particular way of writing, which will make them ignore some of the mistakes and things that you've made, just
Yeah.
because they're so used to your writing style.
Right. I think of the Hand of Adonai series that I'm currently working on, and a lot of stuff will slip past me because I'm just so invested in the world, and again, I know what I'm writing or what I intend to write, which is not always what comes out. And you and Dennis are both so steeped in the world that even if I make a mistake, you guys seem to pick up on what I meant rather than what I actually said. So I'll notice, it's like with the bargain, that went through a number of eyes, and yet people still ended up, there were still mistakes that slipped through,
Oh
you
well, I
know.
mean, just something like, you let me read The Hand of Adonai, so I am very familiar with the world. So much so, in fact, that I actually surprised you a few times when I corrected you on some of your statements and things that you made that
Yeah,
went outside of the lore that you'd previously established.
yeah,
I'm into this story, but by
yeah.
the same token, because I understand it all already and I know where the whole thing's going, I'm not a new reader to it, and so a big gap that you might have in there may not actually get picked up by me. I may
Hmm.
not notice because I already assume the answer because I just happen to know the backstory. Whereas if you let somebody who's brand new, fresh eyes come to it and they don't have any, predisposed notion or knowledge of the storyline, they'll get into it and they'll ask those questions for you. And so, I think part of what the point of what we're trying to say here is, don't allow yourself to criticize yourself out of what you're doing. And if you really
Yeah,
feel that doubt, that sense of doubt, bring other people in. But there are some warnings to make
yeah,
sure that, you're choosing the right people. And again, those areas that you might be critical of, your friends, your alpha readers might pick up on that and start keying in on the same elements for you because they agree with you because you've told them, and so now they're predisposed to it and they see the same things that you see. It's almost like this vicious circle where you're you're feeding into it and somebody sees it just because you pointed it out. It's like, with a painting or a piece of art. You see the mistakes in the art, but to a passerby, they don't see it unless you point it out to them. Well, if you're going to point
right.
out mistakes in your writing and hand your writing to that person, they're going to see it because you pointed it out. Um, but it may not necessarily be so glaring as you think.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, a long story short, if the voice in your head is asking you to be to give up or to throw the project away, that's definitely more self-doubt. If it's keeping you from working on it, if it's keeping you from getting started on a project that you know you need to write, or if it's keeping you from moving forward on a project that you know you need to write, that's something that needs to be dealt with. If, however, it's not preventing you from working, it's just simply encouraging you to do more work, it's probably something that you want to listen to and something that you want to look into a little bit more.
Yeah. So what do you think, Aaron? You think we covered everything on this topic pretty well?
I hope so. I hope so. So, of course, if we didn't, just drop us a line and let us know. Definitely love hearing from you guys. So
Yeah, appreciate it. How can people get a hold of us, man?
they can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/firstinfiction. They can tweet us. I'm at Eddie Gansky. You're at Steve McLean. And yeah, they can email us at firstinfictionpodcasts@gmail.com.
Very cool. So if you want to get a hold of us, those are the ways. I spend some time on Twitter and I'm on Facebook pretty frequently. So if you post to us there, we'll definitely see it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're going to start trying to do these Google Hangouts from now on to hang out with you guys live.
Ah,
And these are going to start going up to YouTube, starting with this one, which should go up Monday morning.
mm-hmm.
And actually, it's probably going to go to YouTube right now, and then
Yeah,
the podcast, which
podcasts.
goes out to iTunes and Stitcher, is going to go out on Monday. So,
Yeah.
Aaron, let's go
Yes.
ahead and plug your book, man. Tell
Okay.
people, you put in all this work and effort. I think that people deserve to hear about what you've done for them by writing
Okay.
this book. So,
Well, thanks. Just doing my service to humanity.
right.
Uh, it's called The Bargain, and the basic premise is kind of a modern day retelling of the Sodom and Gomorrah story. And I think it's a really great book in the sense that it's discusses some pretty deep theological issues and has some interesting ideas about characters and their development and where the line is drawn between what is good, what is evil.
What is your pitch? Go ahead and throw that out there for everyone.
Oh my goodness, you put me on the spot. My pitch: one man has 8 days to write 10 articles to save a destitute desert town. So um, that's it. He's writing articles about the people who live in this town in order to save it from supernatural destruction. So it's pretty cool. Have a couple friends reading it that haven't gotten to it until now, and just got a text yesterday actually from a buddy of mine who's reading it, and he's says he's really impressed, really enjoying it. So I'm
Yeah,
holding steady
that's
at 34 reviews on Amazon, and I
all
think I'm
right.
all the way up to 0 reviews on Barnes and Noble, BN.com. So
Does anyone use
any
BarnesandNoble.com?
I don't
I don't know
know.
anyone. So
But if you've read it, do me a favor and drop me an Amazon review or rate it on Goodreads or something like that, and maybe try and get the word out a little bit. I'd really appreciate that.
very cool. Yeah. So if you get over there, you read it, you like it, go ahead and leave a review. That really helps Aaron.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think it's a good book, and I've heard from a lot of people who talk or who have read it talk about it in a very positive light. They really liked it. So yeah, I mean, good stuff, and you put in all that work, and I just want people to be aware of it. And since we're doing a writing podcast,
Yeah,
people know
about
where
being
to pick up, right?
about being critical, right? So if you feel critical of my book, you can still leave me an Amazon review, a critical Amazon review if you see fit. So that's
Very
just
good.
as awesome. Awesome. Great.
Okay, well, let's wrap it up then. Aaron,
Absolutely.
go ahead and do our sign off, man.
All right. Well, thanks all for listening, and until next week.
Good writing. Okay, well, that was cool.
You need to stop
We'll
it,
end
or
it
are we
right
still
there.
recording?
Yeah, we're gonna stop the broadcast right now, and then we'll actually be back for our next episode as well.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm I'm not sure. We'll have to figure out how to work it with YouTube. It might go up early. Who knows?
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right.
All right.
See y'all later.
Bye.